The second point is, I want to draw our attention to laughter. This is something I haven't seen very much in the other reviews I've read or watched, right? So laughter, the PBA, pseudobulbar affect. So from the psychiatric cognitive perspective, which is just like, let's look at the outside of it. It's simply when somebody laughs at inappropriate times, right? Sort of like a kind of Tourette's kind of laughing, right? But actually from a psychoanalytic or psychotherapeutic perspective, the laughing is a coping mechanism to deal with emotions that are uncomfortable. And this is something that, or too overwhelming to bear. So this is something that Arthur Fleck's character figured out early in life, or didn't figure out, was imposed on him by his mother, who, you see this over and over in the movie, her nickname for him is Happy, because no matter what was happening in his life, all the horrible physical abuse that he, as a little boy, had to endure, she told him he had to keep smiling and make people feel joy and laughter in their lives and whatever, right? So he's continually being conditioned to laugh in these really dark, very abusive periods in his life. So of course, that would create, as you become an adult, this extreme reaction, the PBA, the pseudobulbar affect. So anyway, so that's really important to notice, because many of us don't use laughter that way, but we have other coping mechanisms. I've covered this in other videos, especially in terms of the 12 steps groups, right? So there's any kind of addictive, anywhere along the continuum of addiction, right? Obvious ones like alcohol, drugs, sex, masturbation, porn. These can all be used to cover up and distract us or numb us from emotions we don't want to feel. And we may not even realize why we're doing those things. And of course, extreme versions, cutting, bulimia, eating disorders, but also these other things of intellectualizing. For me, a lot of the laughter for Arthur Fleck was debating and philosophizing and intellectualizing for me. Luckily, because the persona and in the way that the modern world has come out, my way of coping with affect was socially sanctioned and rewarded. I got good marks and I got promoted all the way through the universities and all that. And that was great. So it was adaptive until it got to a point where my emotional life obviously was lacking. And the resources I had as an intellectual in my late 20s wasn't going to cut it, right? So then I was forced to fall back on my resources. I went a very long way to find the answers. And only 10 years later, did I finally discover the depth of psychotherapy and getting the training myself. So the point is, we all have coping mechanisms and various behavioral strategies for dealing with emotions that we were not yet equipped or guided to deal with or coached on how to handle. Especially at a young age and in your formative, impressionable years, you'll just try out different things. Now, in Arthur Fleck's character's case, it was very obvious his mother imposed the coping mechanism on him, took that on as a way of dealing with the pain, both physical, mental, emotional, the whole thing, right? So it's a really interesting and cool way, well, neat way, I suppose, to build a backstory for why the Joker looks the way he does, rather than the classical way, which was he got thrown in a vat of acid or something like that, which you see in some of the other Batman movies and in the comics. Okay, so that's a coping mechanism and strategy, right, for dealing with overwhelming emotions. And then if the longer you do that, the more that these emotions that are overwhelming get suppressed, then it leads into repression, right? Then it becomes part of your unconscious, and now you don't have conscious access to those, and now you can't work with them. So a lot of the work of psychotherapy is to make the unconscious conscious, so you can work on it, so you can heal and grow from it, and just like work on it, depending on what modality you use. It's like overall just like working on it, right? But you can't work on it if you can't get to it. So if you can't feel it, you can't heal it. So if you just keep distracting yourself, numbing yourself, or in his case, just laughing, it doesn't allow him to deal with the actual emotions that are there. And his psychotherapist in the movie was just awful. Horrible depiction of psychotherapy. I don't know what's worse. The old Freudian one where you're lying on a couch and you're telling him about your dreams and, Freud sitting in the back smoking a pipe or something. Or this, where it's a horribly messy and cluttered office, dark, and obviously this is supposed to be like this, right? But I hope you know that that's not what psychotherapy is supposed to look like, right? With a horrible looking office, tons of clutter, and then she's not listening to him at all. Obviously, she also has her own issues and pain that she brings out towards the end. So we also are meant to feel that she's part of the faulty system and all that. But part of that narrative is Arthur Fleck is not getting the help that he's trying to get. So it's very it's tugging on our heartstrings. We get it. It's easier for us to enter into empathy with both characters there, the psychologist and Arthur Fleck himself. Okay, and there's a scene that really illustrates very well the coping mechanisms that Arthur Fleck uses, and that's the scene where he walks into a refrigerator. So big time spoiler alert here, but something very traumatic just happened. He's I believe, I didn't write this in my notes, but I think it was, in terms of the plot, he finds out that, he sees that Arthur Murray uses his clip on his show, or not Arthur Murray, I forget his full name, but Murray. The Robert De Niro character uses Arthur Fleck's stand-up clip and then embarrasses the hell out of him, or he feels that as a very insulting, and then goes home, clears out his refrigerator and walks in. It's a really obvious way of showing that he's used to just numbing. So one of the ways of numbing is laughter. When that doesn't work, he literally just opens up his fridge and goes in and doesn't want to feel anything, not even physical sensations in his body, right? So now, then you'll see in the movie that he suffered severe physical abuse as a child. So all of this is all of this is understandable then as a result of that backstory. And I think that's part of the worry of some of this controversy, that we would feel empathy for this villain. And the movie, the whole point of the movie is to do that, right? And I don't think there's anything ever dangerous about feeling empathy for a character and for anyone, even villains. The empathy is healthy, it's good, it will lead to more goodness, rather than the response that's driven by fear. So insofar as this movie is trying to make us empathize with a villain, I think that's awesome. And I think just in terms of movie making and enjoying it as a fan, that makes it so much more enjoyable, because otherwise you get this one-dimensional villain and it's no fun, right? The villain has to be understandable. We must be able to empathize with the villain for it to be enjoyable for us as fans. Okay, so then moving on to the third point. Oh, and just before I leave that second point about repression and coping mechanisms and the laughter, what happens is when you repress the emotions that you don't get to feel, and you can shove them into the unconscious for too long, eventually when that pain becomes too much, because it doesn't go away. It's really important to realize this. Those emotions, just because we ignore them or we numb ourselves to them, we shove them under the consciousness, they don't go away. They just go away out of our conscious awareness, but they're still there, and they build up and build up and build up and build up over time. Right. So this is something that I think people on both sides of the spectrum, or all sides of the spectrum, understand. So I'm just reminding you of this. And it doesn't go away. So what eventually happens over time is when the pain that's being repressed is too much, it'll either eat itself, it'll fall in on itself and it'll implode, or cave in on itself and disintegrate, leading to some kind of suicide attempt or something like that. Or it will project outwards into a kind of violent lashing out.